Okay, so this is my favorite part of the bee lecture. We're going to talk about the stuff that they can make, most of which here you can actually eat or consume in some way. We're going to start with bee pollen. So honeybees have a special structure called a pollen basket, and that's one way you can identify a honeybee. Honeybees are unlike other pollinators in that they actually consume some of the pollen that they collect. That is because pollen is a great protein source. It is full of a diverse amount of amino acids and is classified as a superfood because it has so many nutritional things in it that are needed by the body. And so it is used to feed growing larvae, but they're not fed this stuff directly. And that is because they don't really have a strong digestive system. They need to break this down. And so what they actually do is they end up fermenting this. And we'll talk about what they make when they ferment this. If you're not familiar with this idea of fermentation, fermentation is when you let some sort of microorganism, whether that be a fungus or bacteria, consume something and create from it either lactic acid or alcohol. And so in the case of these bees, they tend to use yeast, which tends to create alcohol, sort of. And this has a sterilizing effect. Fermentation has a sterilizing effect because bacteria and fungus can't really survive in alcohol. Okay, so they like to ferment this stuff. And actually, I have some bee pollen. I got it from Colombia, and I brought it back with me. And I would love to share it with you guys if you come to class. All right, so let's talk about some of the other stuff that they make. We just talked about bee pollen, but we're also going to talk about royal jelly, something that's only fed to queens. Honey, of course, propolis, wax, and bee bread. And so honey is actually a pretty interesting food. There's a lot of fake honey out there. It's pretty easy to fake it. It's basically just sugar. But there are two other components to honey that people don't think about. The reason that honey has such an acidic flavor is due to the stomach acid of the bee. You see, nectar, which comes from flowers, it is too dense to be eaten by the bees and their larvae. And so the honeybees have to digest it first. However, one honeybee is not enough to do this. And so they use their stomach acid to break it down as much as they can, and then they will regurgitate, which means to throw up, into their twin sister's mouth, another worker, until they have created honey. And then they will use their wings to cool it. Once they put it into like a honeycomb, they will use their wings to cool it and evaporate some of the water content, and they make a thick honey. And so that's why their honeycombs are so full of honey. It also has another element to it, and that is dependent upon the flavors and chemical properties are somewhat dependent upon the flowers that the honeybees have harvested their nectar from. The most famous example is mad honey. So if you go to the supermarket and you look at the honey there, you might notice that some cost more than others, and that is usually dependent upon where it is grown and what types of flowers were used to create that honey. And so if you were to taste honey that was created from orange blossoms, or honey that is created from, let's say, clover, it would have a different flavor. And so different honey has different flavors dependent upon where it's harvested. And the most famous example of this is mad honey. So mad honey actually doesn't only have a unique flavor, but it also has a distinct chemical property, because the bees that harvest this honey, when they harvest nectar, they take some of the chemicals from the rhododendron flowers that grow in Nepal, and these rhododendrons create a toxin called granosite, or sorry, granotoxin. Granosite is something else. So granotoxins are a neurotoxin that are actually somewhat deadly. They can actually kill you in a high enough concentration. And so I would honestly not recommend this. You can legally buy Nepal honey online, and you will experience a high and drunk feeling. But be warned, I would not recommend consuming this. It is a neurotoxin, meaning it affects your nervous system, and it can have long-lasting effects, and I just don't really recommend it. The natives of Nepal grow up with this stuff and have actually sort of co-evolved with this stuff, and it is part of their daily diet, honestly. So they are probably a little bit less affected, and so I would recommend not having this honey. But people who take it report having somewhat of a hallucinogenic effect, a very strange phenomenon. Okay, so this is my favorite bee product, and you can consume this. People will make a tea out of it, and it's really cool because it has an antiviral and antibacterial property to it. So propolis is wax. We're going to talk more about beeswax in a second, but this is a special type of wax. This wax has chemicals in it that are harvested purposely from nature. These bees will go out and seek fungus in particular, or plants, and they will find chemicals in them and extract them. We are not the only chemists on our planet. Bees are chemists too, and they make medicine. We are not the only living things to make medicine. And so, this has gotten a lot of attention lately because it might be a solution to the colony collapse disorder problem. These bees are able to protect themselves from a couple of very savage viruses. There's two viruses in particular, the wing deformity virus and the Lake Sine virus, both of which kill the bees. The Lake Sine virus weakens their immune system, and of course, the wing deformity virus makes them unable to fly. And so these honeybees use propolis to seal their hives and prevent that infection. And we've noticed that the mushrooms that they need are armadillo and reishi. Now, I actually take reishi as a supplement. It has a very calming effect on the mind. Highly recommend it. And the reason why I found out about this was actually from the Joe Rogan podcast. You've probably heard of it. It's the most famous podcast ever. And a man came on that show. His name is Paul Stamets, and he is the world leader in mycology, basically. He's a famous mycologist, and he discovered that these mushrooms could really help the bees, sometimes by making them 800 times more immune, or 45,000 times more immune in the case of reishi. And so it's just really interesting, and I wanted to watch a quick video to sort of talk about this.
Deforestation is causing zoonotic diseases to spread. When there is a loss of...
Okay, let me translate the science jargon. Deforestation is resulting in zoonotic diseases. Zoonotic means animal diseases. Zoo means animal. And so bees are technically animals. Insects are animals. And so it does apply here. Deforestation is causing this because we are losing biodiversity when we do that. And without a diverse number of plants and fungi, bees don't have the same ability to create propolis. So that's what he's talking about.
But foraging bees, the population declines, mites and other diseases then begin to spiral out of control, and suddenly the whole colony collapses. I want to bring to you an epiphany that I've had that I think is just truly revolutionary. That the same mushrooms that can limit bird flu, H5N1, herpes, also positively affect bees and being able for them to control the viral burden and reduce them. So we started doing experiments with bees. They're given extracts of the mycelium, the myco-honey. As the myco-honey increases, there's a radical decline in the viral pathogen payload. They can upregulate their immune system, give them a host defense antiviral shield, allow them to detoxify toxins, and allow them to be better pollinators. Dr. Steve Shepard, who I'm working with, as an entomologist of 39 years of experience studying bees, I'm unaware of any reports that extend the life of worker bees more than this.
Yeah, so what's cool here is you can actually go to his website, and I'll show you in a second here. And he's actually offering free feeders. Currently, I think he's still revving up production. But he's offering free honeybee feeders to anybody who wants one, and you can actually order this for free and have it delivered to your yard, and you'll have a nice safe place for honeybees to collect these extracts from to help make their propolis and boost their immune systems. So very cool. So let's check out that website. I just think it's really neat. So here's his website, and there's the video we just watched. And he's going to tell you in these little parts here why you should be concerned. And this is a cool video. I'm not going to watch all of it.
Honeybees are by far the most important pollinators for agriculture. Approximately a third of the crops grown rely on cross-pollination to thrive.
So I have to pause this every now and then and talk, or YouTube will copyright strike me and I can't upload this. So that's why I'm talking right now.
I don't think bees are properly recognized for the economic benefit that they give to society. I think increasingly they will be recognized as bees become more scarce and food prices climb. But here, in these beautiful almond orchards, one of the most bee-dependent crops in the world. And the almond industry knows in particular that without honeybees, crops are greatly hindered.
In case you don't understand, the reason that we need them for these orchards is because they help to move plant sperm, which is pollen, around, and that helps in the sexual reproduction of the plant. Without the honeybee, farms really just collapse. And in fact, farmers pay millions of dollars to have honeybees shipped to their farms. In some places like China, the pesticides that were used there have destroyed the bees, and now they have to hand pollinate in some fields using paintbrushes instead of bees.
Over the last decade, honeybee populations worldwide have declined drastically. Beekeepers and scientists have been working to try to find out what's the cause of this decline. One of the leading problems facing beekeepers
are very good
at... I didn't mean to do that. So check this out right here. That little guy right there is a mite, and you can see him on here too. And those mites aren't killing the bees directly, but they have in their saliva, they have viruses that deform wings and weaken immune systems. And so the mites are indirectly killing them. In the same way that mosquitoes spread malaria to humans, these mites are spreading diseases.
These mites attach themselves to bees, feed on their blood, feed on the larvae, and transmit viruses.
The varroa mites are very...
I don't know if you could see it there.
They is the varroa mite. These mites attach themselves to bees, feed on their blood, feed on the larvae, and transmit viruses.
So right there you can see the wing has become deformed. And actually this, quite often what happens is these worker bees will be killed by their sisters for being inefficient and not really working.
The varroa mites are very good at developing resistance to chemical treatments. The beekeeping industry had a couple of compounds that they used pretty extensively originally, and it's really just a matter of time before mites develop resistance to that compound.
Right here is a sick bee. You can see her wings are deformed. This is a symptom of varroa and a virus called deformed wing virus.
This colony is not going to make it. So even though there are bees here now, this has been destroyed by varroa. There's all these dead larvae in here that will never become adult bees and never contribute.
There's a tremendous need to develop methods to control varroa mites that are sustainable and don't rely on the use of chemicals, allowing beekeepers to get off of a chemical treadmill. I became aware a couple of years ago of some work by Fungi Perfecti and Paul.
You know, this is interesting because my brother and I were actually talking about this recently. My brother is a brand manager, and his brand that he manages is actually a lice shampoo. Well, it's not really a shampoo. And so a lot of people know that bacteria can become resistant to medication, but not a lot of people know that insects, fungus, basically any living thing that reproduces quickly can become immune to things that kill it over time, and that's evolution. And so insects can evolve just like bacteria can. These mites are becoming resistant. In the same way, lice, which infect humans, have gradually become resistant to pesticides that we put in our hair. Basically, we use pesticides in our lice shampoo. And he's actually using a product right now that suffocates lice. They use silicone beads to clog the airways of the lice instead of using chemicals. And so right now we're sort of having a scientific revolution where we're realizing that antibiotics and chemicals that kill things very quickly lose their effectiveness. Other means of permanently killing pests are being investigated, and using mushrooms to create propolis is a great way to help honeybees do so.
Stamets, they had some mushroom extracts that had antiviral properties, so the idea then became to use mushroom extracts to attempt to control some of these viruses.
The extracts we're using are coming from the living tissue of this mushroom when it was alive, called the mycelium. Now we're seeing that these mushrooms actually extend the longevity of bees.
So he just said something important. A fungus has two parts to it, and I don't know if you can see this color, so I'll try pink. Mushrooms have two parts. There's the cap we all know about, and then there's the underground part. So that's all the stuff underground. And we're actually going to talk a lot about this when we talk about fungus later. But this is called the fruiting body, and that's just the reproductive part that creates spores. Underneath is the mycelium. The mycelium are feeding tubes, and they create the majority of the bioactive chemicals. Bioactive meaning living. They create these chemicals because if you look at a mycelium, they are only one cell thick, and they do not really have a thick cell wall. And so because of this, they have bacteria and viruses constantly interacting with them. And so without a physical barrier between that mycelium and the dirt, they need chemicals to be their defense and not, say, skin. And so that is why the mycelium creates more chemicals than the fruiting body. This is knowledge that can help you in life. You see, if you were to take a mushroom extract as a health supplement, you might be tricked into taking the actual mushroom. But what you should be looking for if you take a mushroom supplement is that they are using the mycelium, not the fruiting body, in that supplement. Just a nice little tip for you. So for example, I take reishi mushroom and I take lion's mane. It helps with clarity and thinking. And I always look for mycelium supplements, not fruiting body supplements. The reason for the smoke there is to actually calm the bees down.
Previous experiments using metarhizium fungi put the fungal spores directly.
That's the plate. So this is made of potatoes and amino acids that the fungus needs. And the fungus was probably planted here, and then its mycelium goes out, and those feeding tubes, the mycelium, start to suck in those nutrients.
In the beehive, and had some success in controlling the mites. However, the fungus did not survive well at the higher temperatures, especially in the summertime. So we have a program to select for strains of this metarhizium that can withstand higher temperatures. And one of the innovative things that is being done is to actually select for strains of fungus that are more virulent against the mites.
Honeybees are critical to agriculture. They pollinate more than 110 varieties of crops. But this orchard that we're standing in is 800 to 1,000 acres, and every single one of those blossoms need to be fertilized in a timely manner all at once.
This research experiment that we're doing, I think it's the largest beehive experiment ever conducted in the world. 532 beehives testing the effects of these extracts in helping bees survive.
So what we're doing is we are sampling these beehives to check virus levels, and then we're also treating them with mushroom extracts, which is what we're testing here.
So one of the beauties of the fungal extract for controlling the viruses in honeybees is the ease of use for commercial beekeepers. They're used to handling products like this as far as mixing something into their sugar syrup and feeding it to bees. It's very simple to adopt.
So he just said something kind of important. Because we harvest so much honey from bees, they lose their food source. And so the way that most beekeepers compensate for that is they feed them sugar water. Now, sugar water is not as good for the bees as honey because honey contains a lot of chemicals in it and properties that help with bee immune systems as well as human immune systems. And so, like, everybody knows that eating honey is way better than eating sugar. It's way better for you to use, if you're going to have a sweet beverage, it's way better to sweeten it with honey. And that's true for bees too. And so we have to give them sugar water as a replacement. And so what beekeepers end up having to do is add chemicals to that sugar water, including this new mushroom extract that they're talking about here.
If our ecosystems fail, what do people do for food? And this is fundamental to saving our ecosystems. So I'm hoping that people will recognize mushrooms for the important roles that they play in the ecosystem we're just now beginning to discover before it's too late.
Isn't that nice? I just think that's really cool. We have a chance to actually be contributors to our environment as humans. I think that's really neat. And so anyway, this is now just talking about what they're doing. They're currently in the works for producing their extract, and you can actually, I don't think right now you can do it, but in the near future you'll be able to order these little kits that he has to help your local bees. And again, sorry, I'm trying to go back. Again, this is used to create this propolis for the bees. All right, I'm running out of time here, so I'm just going to kind of wrap this up. Okay, so next is wax, and that's, again, like the propolis, but lacking the chemicals. And this helps them to create their honeycomb. Now, in the honeycomb, that's where larvae are and also where they store honey. So typically in a beehive, there will be certain sections that only larvae are in, and there'll be certain sections where there are only honey. A common misconception, actually, is that when animals eat or destroy beehives for food, like bears, for example, a lot of people think that bears love honey. Well, actually, bears really are after the beehives for the larva, because that larva is packed with protein. So that's the real reason they're after it. The honey is just a nice bonus, but they really want the larva. Okay, so bee bread is using that bee pollen. So if you look at bee pollen under a microscope, it has this exterior wall of cellulose that's really hard to digest, and bees cannot digest it. The only way that they can make this edible is to create a paste out of it. So they chew up this bee pollen, and they use their saliva to do so. So it's mostly pollen, but they also use nectar and honey along with saliva to help break that down. The acidity of the honey mixed with their saliva helps to ferment, break this down, and then yeast will come in, which is the same thing that we use to make alcohol and bread. Yeast will come in and do what yeast does. It turns this into a bread. It breaks it down, and it also creates specific chemicals that actually sterilize the bees and make them unable to reproduce. And so in reality, what's really interesting is that every bee, except the male drones, every bee that is born could be a queen and could reproduce. But when they are fed this bee bread, they are actually sterilized and can no longer reproduce. Now, bees prefer to wait at least 96 hours before they start to eat the stuff, and that is for that fermentation to begin. Okay, so next is royal jelly. Royal jelly is actually created from a gland in the forehead, and it has nothing to do with honey. It has nothing to do with pollen. It is strictly a carbohydrate. Now, royal jelly, it used to be thought that if you continue feeding a larva royal jelly, it will become a queen. But actually, it is just the absence of the bee bread that causes it to become a queen. The bee bread has a chemical that sterilizes the would-be queens, whereas the royal jelly does not. And so by switching to royal jelly, you will become a fully fertile queen. Now, usually what happens when you have a beehive is they will put royal jelly into several of those honeycombs and then wait to see which of those bees is going to hatch first. The bee that hatches first most likely has better growth hormones and is more genetically fit, and will then go around and kill the sisters, or the other sisters that would be queens. And so she becomes the only queen. Okay, so that's it for stuff that bees make, and then next time we're going to talk about the different types of bees, and we're going to talk about how they reproduce.